Welcome to Unchatted Waters. In this episode, we use a tropical fish tank as a looking glass, exploring coral reef systems. We journey across the globe to really find Nemo and understand where aquarium species come from and the global importance of the marine aquarium trade. So join us as we take a look through the fish tank as a window to another world. Welcome to Unchatted Waters, the podcast that talks to the people behind the science. I'm Kirsty Bradley, your host, and I'm excited to take you on a journey of discovery in our new series. Joining me are two great guests. Joanna leads research on marine wildlife trade and bycatch. She works with many partners from local fishers, trade organisations, and governments across the globe. Her work aims to achieve sustainability for global marine wildlife trade, from sharks and rays to live aquarium fish, considering environmental impacts and socio-economic benefits. Gayatri Reksodihardjo is a marine conservationist and director of a foundation that helps fishers and exporters to improve best practices, as well as collecting data to inform national governments in Indonesia. For over 20 years, she's worked to make the marine aquarium fishery more sustainable by empowering fishers, restoring reefs, and connecting science with communities to create lasting change. So let's start with a really simple question. What is the marine aquarium trade?
Imagine going to your public aquarium and you see fish in a tank there. Or maybe you know somebody who's got a fish tank in their front room. That is the marine aquarium trade. So what it involves is the collection of those organisms, and that could be live fish, coral, other invertebrates like snails or starfish or hermit crabs, and even down actually to live rock and live sand, which creates the basis of that tank. It's the collection or the breeding of those animals in a country where they exist. So that's a country where you've got coral reef ecosystems usually. And then the movement of those animals to the place where that fish tank is. And those species, those animals, have come as part of this global marine aquarium trade.
Okay, so we've got an idea of where the fish and animals are ending up in these mini coral reef ecosystems around the globe and in areas where they might not be native in the marine environment. So if we take a step back, what does marine aquarium trade look like in these areas where those animals are coming from on the other side of the globe?
Well, in places like Indonesia, the marine aquarium trade isn't just about keeping fish, it's about making a living. So for many coastal communities, especially in remote areas, collecting fish for aquarium is an important livelihood because it provides a good income. And Indonesia, with its vast coral reefs, has one of the highest diversity of marine organisms in the world. In relatively shallow, clear water, coral reefs are home to hundreds of different species of colorful corals and thousands of beautiful, vibrant fish. So this variety of species is something you don't see in other parts of the world. So fishers in Indonesia collect fish using their small boats and hand nets and sell them to the village collectors or buyers who then sell to the exporters in the big cities. The exporters pack the fish carefully to make sure they stay healthy for long journeys. Sometimes the journey more than 24 hours. But, hardly anyone sees this full journey from reef to tank. It's hidden story, that one that starts far from city lights. So most people probably don't realize that the fish in their tank might have come from a handmade net in small wooden boat miles away from the nearest city. So it's a long journey, and that connection is often missing at the end.
Thank you. So if I can ask you a follow-up question to do with that. It was a really nice description of the ecosystems that are Indonesia, where you're joining us from. So how many steps are there in that chain? If you've got fishers collecting the fish, you have exporters, how many people are involved on the Indonesian side before the kind of trip across the globe?
Well, it's a lot of collectors in Indonesia. I mean, at the moment, we identified there are 20 provinces across Indonesia that supply fish to the exporters. We don't know exactly the number of the collectors, but we know, they spread across Indonesia from west to east. I mean, that is like, very, very far away.
What's the step once it's exported from Indonesia?
Well, from the point of export from Indonesia, it would come on an international flight and it would arrive into one of we call them our border inspection posts at the airports. And they would be received and checked and made sure that they've got all their right certification, like health certificates or permits if they were required. And at that point then, the fish, we call it a consignment of fish, so a box of fish, might then go direct to a wholesaler. It might go to something that we call a consolidator, who receives fish and then sends that direct out to retail shops or the pet shops. And sometimes pet shops can also have direct links to exporters in countries like Indonesia. Gayatri's really nicely described the complexity of the collectors across Indonesia, which is, a huge country. And they go to collection points and then export, and then they arrive into a country like the UK, and then there's multiple more steps in the system. So yeah, it can be quite a complicated picture of ownership, I guess, from the point of collection to the point it's in somebody's fish tank.
And there's lots of contributing people in that chain as well across the globe, which is really exciting and really shows the value of this kind of industry. So we've had a little talk about what the marine aquarium trade is. We've talked about what's happening on the other side of the globe. So if we take a step back and peel back the complexity and think about the ecosystem that we're building in a fish tank, let's build up that jigsaw puzzle. Where do we start?
Sure. I mean, the first thing that we would probably do is get some sediment in there. We can call that live sand, and that has kind of bacteria and things in which you need to. It's like a starter for the fish tank.
Would you compare it to like compost?
I guess so. It's got things in there that kind of activate the water,
okay.
And make sure that it starts cycling and cycling in the way that we would need it to do. So that would be our first step. And then on top of that, you want to build structure to have some height and depth. There's actually a trade for live rock, and that also has kind of bacteria and other things that would be then activated when it goes into the fish tank and starts cycling, creating the conditions in the water that we need. But then the first thing that we would add of interest, maybe...
the first colourful thing.
The first colourful thing, yeah. And this would be the stony coral or hard coral. It's alive, it's an animal. So some people maybe sometimes think, is it a plant or is it an animal? But it's an animal. There's two types of coral that you could get in a fish tank. So you get this hard stony coral, which creates a calcium carbonate skeleton, and it's really the building blocks of the reef ecosystem. And then you also get soft coral, which are, by its name, soft and flexible. Now, the thing about stony coral, because it is the reef building structure, it's so important to coral reef ecosystems in the wild. And so in the sort of 1980s, because it was traded, there was kind of an acknowledgement that we should make sure that any trade in that stony coral is regulated and managed. And so there's something called CITES, which is the Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species of Flora and Fauna. And that international convention means that countries have to use a permit system to ensure that they're only trading in quantities of something which is not going to have a detrimental impact to that population in the wild. So in Indonesia, those coral farmers or coral collectors must make sure that they are trading in a sustainable way.
Brilliant. I think that brings me on to the question that I wanted to ask you, Gayatri, that Jo's kind of laid the foundation for in her answer. So she talked about collection of coral and farming of coral in Indonesia. So what does that look like?
Well, coral are cultured in two main forms in Indonesia. So one is in controlled facilities, like in ponds or in large aquariums, where you can adjust light, water flow, water quality, and the type of feed you give to corals. And the other is farming at sea, which we call mariculture, where corals are fragmented and attached to the substrate.
Sorry, could you just explain fragmented for the jargon alarm, please?
So that's the fragment of the corals from the mother of the corals. So that being fragmented. So make it into small pieces. So then attach to the substrate and place on racks directly in the sea. So it's well, imagine metal frames placed on the sandy patches between coral reefs with tiny coral that being fragmented growing on them. So it's like quite an underwater garden and slowly coming to life. So these corals are tended by coral farmers, local community members who maintain their coral fragments every day. And the farmers, they need to clean the corals of algae and remove any creatures that could harm the corals. So just like land farmers weeding their vegetables. And one of the benefits of mariculture is that the coral farmers don't need to worry about feeding the corals or managing the water quality. However, in recent years, coral farmers have started noticing changes like rising sea temperature and signs of bleaching. Coral becomes white. So the warmer water can turn corals white and cause them to lose their color. So in some areas, farmers have even moved coral frames to deeper and cooler waters, or they switch to more resilient species that can better tolerate higher temperatures. So farming corals in Indonesia is one way to contribute to conservation. So coral farmers now dedicate 10% of their corals to reef restoration programs. So it's beyond supporting livelihoods. Coral farming is becoming a way to build reef resilience in the face of the climate change. So that's the situation of the coral farming in Indonesia.
And I mean, what Gayatri's described there with the 10%, the farmers who are growing corals for the international trade are then putting coral back into national reef restoration. And I just think it's a really cool conservation idea that, that the traders are able to work with those restoring local reefs.
I suppose when you see a coral tank in somewhere like the UK, you think, oh, that's been taken from the marine environment. You don't really think that that has benefited by adding something back into the natural environment, or it's helped by understanding the impacts of climate change with those farmers doing that every day. They're noticing those changes that you wouldn't think. You would think it's very much you take the coral from the wild, you put it in your tank. There's actually a benefit in the other direction, which is really interesting to hear about. We can learn more about the corals that are more resilient to climate change through that kind of process. It's really great. So corals ticked off the list. We've got coral in our tank now. So what do we need to add to our jigsaw puzzle to keep building our mini coral ecosystem?
Okay, so, we've got our corals, as you said. I think the next thing would be the less talked about invertebrates. This is where my journey in the marine aquarium trade began with my PhD on feather duster worms.
So they really look like feather dusters.
They do look like feather dusters, yeah. So actually, a lot of the invertebrates are there because they have a job to do in the mini ecosystem. We sometimes call some of these animals together as cleanup crew because they're there to make sure that the water quality is maintained, because they're eating algae that's growing. And they're also cleaning up the uneaten food. So we can get all different kinds of cleanup crew. So we might have things like turbo snails, and hermit crab.
What's a turbo snail?
It's just a type of snail that you would see. It's kind of...
Is it like a conical, when you have a hermit crab picking a shell and it's the tallest, curliest, nicest looking shell?
Yeah.
I can imagine a cartoon.
And then the hermit crabs and the shrimp, and then you also get things like sand-sifting starfish, which can turn over the sediment and make sure that you don't get kind of dead spots of where it's not circulating with that live sand that we talked about earlier. There's actually over 500 different species of invertebrates that are in the marine aquarium trade. We did a study where we looked at what was coming into the UK, part of the marine aquarium trade, and we found that over half were invertebrates. Invertebrates might be overlooked sometimes because they're not as flashy as some of the iconic fish that we think about, but they're really important in terms of the functioning of that system.
So now we've got another piece of the jigsaw puzzle ticked off. We've got our substrate, our coral, we have our invertebrates or our cleanup crew tidying up after everybody. What about when the celebrities move into this ecosystem?
Yes, I like to talk about dory. So fish like dory, the blue tang, are definitely the celebrities of the reef. They are often the most recognizable and well-loved species in home aquariums. But while they are beautiful, most people don't know where they actually come from. So the blue tang is the type of surgeonfish. I guess they call it the surgeonfish because the tail is like the scalpel that the surgeon used. So the blue tang is found in the tropical reefs, including those in Indonesia. I mean, these fish live in a strong current areas, which makes them quite tricky to collect. They are fast, agile swimmers and need to be caught carefully to avoid stress or injury. So in the past, some fishers use cyanide to catch them. So cyanide is the poison to stun the fish, to make the fish a bit sleepy basically, which cause damage to both the fish and the reef. But things are changing. So we work closely in Indonesia with local fishers to train them in net collections. So teaching free diving technique and how to use barrier and scoop nets that allow them to catch fish without harming the reef. So many fishers are eager to improve their practices. So they want to do it right because a healthy reef means stable income and higher quality fish. So yes, dory might be the star, but there is a whole team of skilled, committed fishers behind the dory story. So that's my Dory the celebrity.
Thank you for describing what one of our celebrities, Dory, who we're all familiar with, that can swim really fast. And it's really interesting to hear that they need to be collected by freedivers. It's not something I would have imagined. It's really interesting to hear there's a huge new skill set that we might not be aware of, which is being developed and being improved, and that those collectors are really invested because it is so important for their income. So what if we think about the other celebrity that our listeners might be familiar with?
So yeah, the other celebrity that we might think of is Nemo, or the clownfish, and it is one of the most commonly traded fish species in the marine aquarium trade. Clownfish are found in pairs and they live in an anemone. Unlike Gayatri's description of Dory, many of the clownfish which are found in trade are thought to be tank bred. It's sometimes hard to know exactly how many, but we do know that they're routinely cultured by people who sell fish, but also by hobbyists. Gayatri, in your facility, you have breeding programs.
Yes, we have in our facility in North Bali culturing fish. And in Indonesia context, it depends on the species. If a species is protected under the national or international, then a license, a permit to culture the fish is needed. Culturing fish, I think, especially the endemic species, species like the one that we culture, the Banggai cardinal fish, can make a big difference for both conservation and local livelihood.
Thank you. Could you define what endemic means, please?
Endemic is if the species, the animal, or the plant only distributed, only found, live in only a certain areas, so not found anywhere else, and usually only in small area. So, the Banggai cardinal fish is only found in the Banggai archipelago in Indonesia. It's a beautiful species, with its striking stripes and elegant fins. And this species quickly become a star in home aquariums around the world. But, overharvesting and habitat loss put its wild population at risk. So in our aquaculture and training center in North Bali, we try to set up facility is simple on purpose, low cost, and also run by a group of women from the village who raise this Banggai cardinal fish to healthy size. So, the center become a hands-on learning site for local communities, students, hobbyists, and even government officials. So because it's a simple and low tech, so we want that type of aquaculture are easy to replicate in other places. So yes, culturing this fish provide an alternative source for the trade while giving wild population a chance to recover. And if the species is endemic, producing them within the country ensure that both economic and ecological benefits stays within the local community. So, culturing fish is not about replacing wild collection entirely, but about finding a balance that supports people and protect the species.
So protecting them is of extra importance because once they're gone from that location, they're gone from the globe.
Yeah.
So we've started to really build a picture of our mini coral reef system, and we've started to learn how animals from across the globe start to populate that tank in this episode so far. So are we saying that people shouldn't have a home aquarium?
No, that's not what we're saying at all. I've got a fish tank. Okay, it's not marine, but I've got a fish tank. Aquariums really, they're part of the inspiration for many of our kind of backgrounds in wanting to pursue a career in what we do. And we can't all go to see these animals in the reef. We can't all go to the places that have reef ecosystems. So it allows more people to get an insight into this world, this amazing biodiverse world. And it makes us care. It makes us want to know more about these fish and protect these fish. So I think it's got its place. But what we want hobbyists to do and industry to do is maybe ask more questions about traceability. Asking when you're at the fish shop, where has my fish come from? Was it cultured? Was it tank bred? Has this coral come from Indonesia where it's been farmed in one of those farms that Gayatri has described? How was it collected? What was used to collect it? And I think that if we start to ask more of those questions, it will start to, improve traceability. What a great story around that coral, that if we can connect the person buying the piece of coral to that coral farmer who's supporting a reef restoration project in Indonesia, I think that's a really powerful conservation tool.
It's a nice image to think about the journey across the globe. And, Indonesia is over 7,000 miles away. And connecting up with people across the globe, it's a really nice target to aim for because joining up and collaborating globally is such an important driver for a lot of marine sustainability. Gayatri, I don't know if you want to come in on, can you give us an idea from the Indonesian side, the benefits of having this kind of trade?
I agree with Joe, we should not stop keeping the fish. So, how we think about fish in marine tanks is such an important point because, when we think of fish, most people accept the idea of eating them because, fish are seen as food, source of protein. But when it comes to aquarium fish, species that can live for years and bring joy, fascinations, and learning into people's lives, there's suddenly much more debate. So, what we have seen on the ground in Indonesia is that when fishers realize their income depends on healthy reefs with thriving coral, diverse species, and abundance, they start to see themselves as stewards. So they are not just collecting fish anymore, but now they are protecting the very ecosystem that supports their livelihoods. So in many places, these fishers have become like true guardians of reef. And perhaps, to be optimistic, without the trade, we might not have these guardians at all. So many of these areas are remote, when fishers lives, and the fishers are the ones who notice bleaching, coral loss. So I think when done responsibly, the trade can help forge a powerful connection between people and reef, between income and conservation. So, protecting the environment becomes a way of protecting their way of life. I think, that's how the way I see it, the marine aquarium trade.
So we've come to the end of our episode here, and it's time for our feature, the Fun Facts feature. But for this series, I've coined the phrase, a piece of treasure. So we've gone on this journey of discovery across the globe in this episode. So along the way, there might be a fact or a piece of information, a nugget of information that our listener can take away and really learn from this episode. So I'm hoping that each of you have got a medallion with you and you're ready to share them. So I'd like to come to you, Jo, first for your piece of treasure on our journey.
Yeah, so my piece of treasure is the biodiversity that we find in trade. So it's super biodiverse. We've got over 1,500 species of bony fish, around 140 species of stony coral, and around 500 species of invertebrates. It's super biodiverse, but actually most trade is in only a very small proportion of those species. So we have the species like the iconic Nemo that you see higher volumes of, and then we have lots of much lower volumes of lots of species.
So Gayatri, it's your turn, please.
Well, my fun fact, my treasures, a coral reef is like a living city. So corals are the buildings, and fish and other invertebrates like shrimps, sea snails, they all play all kind of roles, cleaners, grazers, guards. Even the clownfish have their place. But they're tricky, so they only live in certain anemones. And if those anemones bleach, they move out. So when you spot a clownfish in the wild, so it's not just cute, but it's a sign the reef is still hanging on. So go snorkeling in Indonesia.
Brilliant. So this has been a really eye-opening episode. I've really enjoyed looking through the window to the coral reef through the fish tank and really understanding all of the intricate parts of the chain and the way that people's income are reliant on it across the globe, and how a passion for the marine world can benefit people all around the world. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Kirsty. It was great.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. This podcast was made by CEFAS, the Centre for Environment, Fisheries and Aquaculture Science. To keep up to date with us, follow us on social media using @CEFASGovUK. We hope you can join us again next time.